Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a highly charged, genuinely fascinating clash of perspectives. We're talking about wealth inequality, the nuts and bolts of business, and the very nature of capitalism itself. We are looking at a viral piece of commentary that tackles the intense political rhetoric surrounding billionaires head-on. It's a deep dive into how wealth is made, who actually deserves it, and how history is frequently used and fiercely debated to justify modern economic policies. Now, as always, we aren't here to take sides. Our goal is simply to break down the arguments presented in our source material clearly and impartially. So let's jump right in. Here is our agenda for today. We'll kick things off with the wealth accumulation debate, followed by the Bezos burger analogy. After that, we'll examine personal merit and risk, explore a plea for nuance, and finally, look at a historical debate over the American Revolution.
All right, Section 1, the wealth accumulation debate.
To really understand the creator's critique, we first have to understand exactly what he's reacting to. The source material opens with this direct assertion from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which essentially sets up the primary target for the entire commentary. She argues that extreme wealth accumulation is just inherently flawed. In her view, acquiring $1 billion simply isn't the result of pure, honest labor. She believes it requires exploiting market power, breaking the rules, or paying workers less than their true value. Basically, for AOC, the mere existence of a billionaire implies an unearned advantage, and this is the exact premise our source creator sets out to absolutely dismantle. In stark contrast, the YouTube creator fires back, fiercely defending the concept of earned wealth. He argues that an intense, relentless work ethic absolutely justifies immense financial reward, up to and including $1 billion. He fundamentally rejects the idea that there should be some sort of cap on what someone can earn if they're willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears. To him, the ceiling of your success should literally only be limited by your drive, not by some arbitrary moral boundary set by politicians. Moving on to Section 2, the Bezos burger analogy. So you might be wondering, how exactly does someone actually earn $1 billion without inherently exploiting the system? Well, the source brings in a perspective from someone who has actually done it, illustrating the mechanics of business growth. The video highlights an interview with Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who uses this highly relatable analogy of a burger joint. Bezos explains that you start small. You open one restaurant with 10 employees, and you make the best burgers around. People absolutely love them. Because you've created a service that people value, you make a little money. So what do? You open a second location, then a third. Eventually, you scale this beloved service to 1,000 outlets. By the time you've done that, through simply providing a product millions of people actively choose to buy, you become a billionaire.
And this brings us to a really crucial question posed by the source. At what exact moment did that business model become unethical? The creator uses this Bezos analogy to challenge the logic of his political opponents. Think about it. If opening one popular restaurant is completely ethical, and opening two is ethical, why does the natural multiplication of that success suddenly transform into something sinister once it hits a certain dollar amount? The core argument here is that immense wealth is often just the mathematical result of providing a highly desired service at a massive scale.
Which brings us to Section 3, personal merit and risk. At this point, the creator pivots away from the theoretical billions of Jeff Bezos and brings the argument down to a highly personal, micro-level narrative. To counter the idea that wealth is just unearned or the result of systemic privilege, the creator shares his own stark reality. He points out that just 1 year prior, he was essentially homeless. He was sleeping on floors and couches, totally on the verge of giving up. Fast forward to today, and through what he describes as immense luck, divine intervention, and an incredibly grueling work ethic, he's running a highly profitable business. He uses this stark contrast to emphasize that pulling yourself up from nothing takes a massive personal toll that critics often just overlook. He really hammers home the hidden realities of being a business owner. The creator points out that before the success, he spent tens of thousands of dollars on a dream he thought was completely failing. He talks candidly about taking the hits, absorbing massive financial risks, and even dealing with theft and people taking advantage of him. His main argument here is that politicians who criticize profit completely ignore the sheer terror, the potential for financial ruin, and the massive personal sacrifice that entrepreneurs risk every single day to build something from the ground up.
Section 4, the plea for nuance.
Now, at this point, you might think the creator is simply defending billionaires unconditionally. But actually, scratch that. This is where the explainer takes a really interesting turn. He makes an explicit demand for nuance.
Despite his passionate defense of capitalism and scaling, he introduces a massive caveat regarding corporate power. He states super clearly that he isn't just a shill for billionaires, and he fully acknowledges that massive corporations, like Amazon or Walmart, can absolutely devastate local mom-and-pop shops. He argues that society has to find a balancing act. We need to scrutinize massive corporate monopolies without adopting the extreme rhetoric of wanting to entirely destroy the wealthy. So, the crucial takeaway here is that the creator is actually criticizing both ends of the political spectrum. On one side, he calls out the radical left for demonizing all wealth and ignoring the harsh realities of business risk. But simultaneously, he calls out the ultra-capitalists who believe big business should be allowed to just crush every small competitor without any regulation whatsoever. He argues that losing the ability to view these economic issues with a nuanced, middle ground perspective just leads to societal laziness and extreme, bigoted thinking. Finally, Section 5, Debating the American Revolution. For our final section, we shift from modern economic theory to historical interpretation. The source tackles a very specific historical claim made by AOC regarding the founding of the United States. The video plays a clip of her asserting that the American Revolution was fundamentally a class revolt. She paints it as a rebellion by the masses against the extreme wealth and aristocracy of the era. By framing the birth of the nation this way, she's essentially suggesting that fighting against immense wealth is a fundamentally American tradition. Well, the creator pushes back on this historical framing incredibly hard. He argues that this is essentially an attempt to rewrite history to support a modern socialist agenda. According to the source, the colonial anger wasn't directed at wealth as a general concept. Instead, it was aimed at a distant, unaccountable British monarchy that was imposing heavy taxes, things like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, without giving the colonists any actual representation in Parliament. To prove that the revolution wasn't some socialist uprising against the rich, he points directly to the leaders of the revolution themselves. I mean, look at George Washington. He was one of the wealthiest landowners in the colonies. Thomas Jefferson was a highly wealthy plantation owner. John Hancock, an incredibly rich merchant. The source argues that the revolution was actually led by colonial elites, not a ground-up revolt against the wealthy, which he claims entirely dismantles the historical narrative presented by AOC. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We've seen the arguments for both sides today. We have the belief that extreme wealth is inherently unearned and exploitative, stacked up against the reality of personal risk, intense work ethic, and the simple mathematics of scaling a popular product. So how do we as a society objectively balance the need to hold massive corporate power accountable while still incentivizing and rewarding the inherent risks of building a business? It's a complex puzzle that absolutely requires the nuance our source advocated for. Thank you so much for joining me as we walked through these fascinating perspectives. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.